This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit Podcast. I'm Kay Savitz. I was adding a bunch of ham radio newsletters to the Internet Archive's digital library of amateur radio and communications, and I noticed the word Atari on one of the pages. In the September 2019 issue of Solid Copy, the newsletter of the CW Operators Club, Nick Kennedy had written, "Few hams who are both Morse code enthusiasts and programmers of microcontrollers have been able to resist trying their hand at a keyer or two. I've done several in the past 30-plus years, starting with one for the 6502 in an Atari 800 and on through PICs, AVRs, and now the Arduino." So I contacted Nick, amateur radio call sign WA5BDU, to find out what his Atari project was all about. First, a little bit of ham radio background. Morse code, that language of dots and dashes, can be sent over the radio waves using a Morse code key. Even if you know nothing about ham radio, I bet you can picture a basic Morse code key. When you tap the little lever, it makes an electrical connection that makes a sound. That's called a straight key. Avid Morse code enthusiasts may prefer a fancier paddle key with two levers, one for short beeps and one for longer ones. A keyer is a device that is connected between the paddle key and the radio. It allows the sender to control the timing of the transmitted signals and other factors. Nick's software, called WA5BDU Computer Keyer, turned his Atari computer into the keyer. He wired his Morse code paddle and his ham radio to joystick port 2. As he sent a message using his Morse code paddle, the Atari interpreted the signal, adjusted it as necessary, displayed the outgoing message on the screen, and sent the signal to the radio. Or Nick could simply type on the Atari's keyboard to send Morse code messages, skipping the paddle key altogether. Prior to the interview, Nick sent me the keyer program and all the source code, as well as a packet radio terminal program that he wrote and a tank game written by his brother. Check the show notes for links to all of those. This interview took place on January 21st, 2023. A video version of this interview is also available on YouTube and Internet Archive.
Well, the prehistory of the ham radio starts first. This is like 8th grade. I was 13, and our parish priest at the school where I went came over. Anybody interested in ham radio? A few hands went up. Mine was one. I got my novice license when I was 13. So after college is when, started, well, it was well after college, I guess, when Apple II and that sort of personal computers were coming out and becoming popular. I got interested, and I like to say it's for the technical stuff because that's what I've always enjoyed doing. But really, we used to go to a pizza place that had an Asteroids arcade game. I thought, now that is really cool. I'd like to have one of those, and found out about the Atari 800 and went up to Columbia, Missouri. I was living in Missouri at the time and bought one. And I'm sure you've been down this road before, but it's kind of shocking. I was telling my sons about this the other day. Basic computer, $800. That's 16K, another 160 for the extra 32K. Cassette data recorder, $80. Basic cartridge, $35. Asteroids cartridge, $35, on and on. Then later you get the disk drive. That's another $450. The dot matrix printer, $400. And you need an 850 interface to drive that. I say all that because I'm pretty much of a tightwad, so it's kind of amazing that I brought myself to the point of spending that much money in $1982, but I did. The interesting thing was when I started playing with it, games, of course, at first, but, typing little basic programs. I'd had a one semester hour Fortran course in college. You typed out all these Hollerith cards. You took them over to the computer center and put them on a table. And you come back the next day for your printout, and a lot of times it would say, error, you made an error. So you went back and fixed the card that was bad. You waited another day, and I thought, this is not fun. I don't like this computer stuff. So I get on the Atari, and I go, hey, I made a mistake. I backspace on the screen. I correct it. I hit enter. I hit run. It's fantastic. And BASIC looks a lot like Fortran. And I don't know how far I'm going to ramble on this, but the next step was, well, you keep hearing about assembly language, assembler. And I could see that that's kind of like a priesthood. There's a few people who can do it, and most people can't. And they talk about it like, oh boy, you know. And I thought, well, I'd love to figure out how to break into that. So I got the assembler editor cartridge, and there were no tutorial type books back then. You know, it would just say, this Gesundheiter is for when you want the Gesundheit. And I go, well, but what does that mean? I don't get it. So it took a long time to break into it. But the Keyer program was one of my big projects where I learned a lot about assembly and a whole lot about programming the Atari. So it really taught me a lot. It probably took me a couple of years to finish the thing, which was, I started in 1987, and I think I got some mention. QST, I think in 1989, they had a column called Online, and they would list programs, I guess typically public domain programs, you know. And I said, I wrote him a letter. I said, how about announcing my Keyer program? You know, it's pretty cool, I think. And the guy writes back and says, okay, could you send us a printout of your source code? And I said, my source code weighs about a pound. It's a stack of paper an inch thick. So nobody's going to sit down and type in. I said, just tell them to write me, and, I'll send them a disc or something, or a cassette. So they agreed to do that. Because, back in those days, a program might be a couple of pages of basic code. I subscribed starting out to Soft Side magazine. It covered 4 little personal computers. One of them was the Atari, and the programs, and I would sit down and type them in, but obviously you're not going to do that with a huge assembly language program.
Sure. So how many people wrote to you and asked for this program from you?
A few. I've been going through some correspondence that I haven't looked at in forever, and I had a few people saying, oh, I really like this. And one guy, you just never know what's going to happen. It's like 1989, and people are not only leaving the cassette recorder behind, they're leaving the disk drive behind too, and using something like my SI2 PC. And this guy writes me a letter. He says, I want to try it, but all I have is a cassette data recorder. Can you put it on one? I go, I don't even know how, but I thought about it. I sent it to him, and I got a real nice letter back. He says, oh, I love it. It's the greatest thing. So, but I don't think a lot did, and in hindsight, when I thought about it later, I thought, why would I devote so much time to a dedicated keyer that's going to tie up a computer, which will shortly be known as an orphan computer? It's not supported anymore. And I did it because it was fun and it was challenging. And once I got it working, I thought it was fantastic. I made contacts on the radio with it, and I loved it. But it wasn't something a lot of people were going to embrace. Now, QST did have a couple of articles. I think somebody did a Morse code reader. And I did a few other things, like something that's similar to a terminal program to control a packet radio controller, and I think maybe something to control the synthesizer. Turns out I was real interested in data communications, and I had a second Atari, and I tied the two together via their joystick ports. First, it was this terminal. They could talk to each other. And then I made one of them be the server for another one. One of them had a disk drive, one didn't. Mm-hmm. So I had to invent a whole protocol for sending stuff out over those PIA pins, and it worked really well. So, nice. But getting into sorry.
No.
I don't know if you want me to start rambling on about the keyer, or if you want to.
Yeah, I'd like to know about the keyer. I played with the software today. It's beautiful done. You got displayless interrupts, and it looks like you put some time into it. And there was I understand, a hardware component that plugged into the joystick port number 2. Can you explain how that interface did it actually hook to your radio, or just to the Morse code bug?
Well, it was both, because you have several I/O pins available. So you need a pin for the dot paddle and one for the dash paddle. I don't know if you operate. I think you're ham, but I don't know if you operate.
Yeah, I'm a ham, but you can't. My listeners might not be. Right. So this is a kind of if an average person thinks of a Morse code thing, they're probably thinking of a single lever that goes down. Right. And this is a more advanced kind of keyer that has 2 paddles. There's a left that you hit with your thumb that might do the dots, I think, and then the one on the right you hit with your index finger does the dashes, and that way you can send more clear.
And
Yeah.
depending on the design of the keyer, if you grip both of them, you get alternating dots and dashes, and so you can use that. But yeah, it's so it allows you to send a lot cleaner and a lot faster code. So but there's 2 pins in there, and of course you need a ground. It's kind of like, if you're in the electrical stuff, it's basically like a Form C switch. Well, this way's dot, this way's dash. Well, not quite, because you can close them both at the same time. With the Form C switch, you can't. But anyway, it's similar to that, like a 2-pole single throw switch. You could use something like that, as a matter of fact. And then the output actually comes off one of the pins. Being a PIA device, you can program it as an input or an output, just like on your current Arduinos and so forth. So that is what keys or switches on your transceiver. And generally, it'll work better. And also, you don't really want to endanger your Atari. And so you'll have a little interface, which will typically be just like a single transistor. It'll turn that transistor off and on. And that transistor's output goes to the radio. And then I put another item in. I had a little box. It's not required, but I have a thing called a command signal, because the keyer you can give it commands. And you can give it commands in Morse. You can give it commands from the keyboard. You can also give it commands from Morse. And as far as blowing my own horn a little bit, I think my keyer, as far as I know, is the first one that did that, where you can send your keyer commands right from the paddle. There were some that come out later, but at this time, you didn't see self-contained MCUs, microcontroller units, that had all the peripherals built in, the PIA, the timer, and all this other junk. And when you did, they were a little more expensive. And initially, they had you had to have a special burner, and you couldn't erase them. The whole. But at any rate, they came on a little later. But I think mine was the first, and so you could. And when I say commands, I mean you can change the speed of the keyer. You can change the ratio of dots and dashes to spaces. There's an optimum ratio, but some people will like to vary that a little and personalize their sound. You could change the pitch of the side tone. And then another thing I programmed, which a lot of keyers, I don't know if some had it then, even though they weren't microcontroller based, is memory. So you put memory messages, and you just initiate that message, and it sends it. Well, I incorporated a feature so you could embed these commands in the messages. That gets into some things like simulated conversations, where here's a guy sending 25 words a minute at a pitch of 600 hertz, and then zip, a couple of embedded commands, and here's a guy talking to him 18 words per minute and 500 hertz side tone. So you can actually make it sound like, it's a parlor trick. It has no real use, but it was fun.
Nice. So you could change the settings of the software by sending Morse code to the software, basically.
Right.
Nice.
And you could also embed those commands within your saved messages if you wanted to. And hams use that a lot these days. Of course, a very sophisticated software running under Windows on the PC. But when these guys they call contesters, and I do that sometimes, you're trying to contact as many people as you can in a certain time frame, and there's other constraints. Is it USA only? Is it foreign countries, etc.? Anyway, there's a standard signal report you give, because you don't want to waste any time. It's 599. That's kind of like, how are you? You say, I'm fine. So they jump the speed up incredibly, because you already know what they're going to say, 599, and then they drop the speed back down to simplest copyable. So that kind of thing is being used today. I know I'm diverging an awful lot, but as you pointed out, I learned to do some stuff like display list interrupts. So I had 3 normal blue screen text windows, and then I had a little red background line. I think I call that the command line. If you're going to do a command, that would light up and say command ? It's been a while since I've used it, although I did have it out recently. But then there was a command that had all your status stuff, like your side tone pitch is this, and your ratio is this, and your speed is this, and so on. One of them is a memo pad mode. That's if you're talking to somebody, you don't have a notepad, so you can just type in, you're copying him, you know how to copy code, so it's not copying it, but you can type in the stuff there. and then the other was a type ahead buffer for sending. So that was a 256 character buffer, whatever you call it, a circular buffer, I guess, where it just goes around in circles. So all that was fun to implement because I was doing it all for the first time and learning by doing.
Nice. You'd said at the time that you anticipated adding features including logging and transceiver control, but then the number of Atari users dwindled and you didn't want to translate the whole thing to the PC and start over.
It's interesting. I guess I did. I forgot that I wrote that, but yeah, I did want to. And there's so many sophisticated logging programs these days, and logging is not a legal requirement anymore, but it used to be. But most serious hams, especially if they're working foreign countries and stuff, they want to put them in a log, and it's great to have the ability to do that on a computer.
Sure. So you wrote this program in the AMAC assembler on the Atari in all assembly
Right.
language. Wow.
Yeah, and the AMAC was. Well, I don't know how many people have used it because it was kind of buggy and it was really hard to use. But I overcame some of its difficulties. One of them is it had a type of copy protection where it would read a bad sector. And so in order to report the bad sector, it would have to retry about 3 times before it would say it's a bad sector. So it goes, you hear that disk positioner grind, and then it does. And this is every time because when you're programming, you're always toggling back between your editor and your assembler because they were separate programs in the AMAC. Another thing was it had a macro feature, which is the reason I bought it. But it turns out if you write a macro longer than 20 or 30 lines, I never did try to figure out how many, it would just blow up. But I found out I could get by with shorter macros. And later when people came out with, there was Xformer, and now there's all these other emulators, you could swap that development to on your PC, and you're just jumping back and forth between AMAC and the AMAC editor, and you're doing your assembling on there, and then you just, when you get it done, you copy it back to your real Atari. Mm-hmm. So that really made that pretty sweet. Those simulators that they have, and I've used Atari 800, and there was another one, and I don't retain stuff like I did back when I first.
Yeah, there's a bunch of emulators. There's Atari 800. There's Altera is really good.
Yeah, I think I used that one. Yeah,
there's some others. Yeah.
It's amazing how faithful they are, but even this one from 30 years or more ago was pretty faithful, called Xformer. So, I couldn't believe that could be done. But yeah, it's a miracle of computers, I guess, and really good programmers.
Did you actually use the Morse code keyer on the air, or was it mostly you were just having fun making the keyer?
I used it some, and I actually took it out to ham radio field day once, and that's where you make zillions of contacts and used it there. But like so many things that programmers do, you spend all that work doing it, then you fire it up and you go, wow, it works great. You use it a little bit and you go, okay, that project's over. You put it aside, you go to work on something else. But I did use it some. And one thing I was working on and I never finished, I wanted to put it on a cartridge because it would be so much easier, because you have to have a disk drive if you're not using one of those emulators, and you have to boot it up and all that stuff. I thought, well, if I had it on a cartridge, and I kind of dipped my toe into making my own cartridges. I wire wrap built a EEPROM burner that was designed by Steve CRCA of I forgot what magazine he used to work for. It has his own now, but anyway. And then I bought a UV lamp and made an eraser, and actually made a cartridge for, I think, that packet controller thing and something else. But the keyer program had gotten so huge, it was bigger. The object code was bigger than 16K, which if you programmed in assembler, and if you're not using images and a whole lot of text, that's a lot of programming to get to 16K. So I wanted to shrink it down a little bit. I know there's cartridges bigger than 16K, but back then it was mostly 8 and 16K, and I wanted to get it to fit in 16K and never quite got that far.
Nice. So on this disc you sent me, and I love that you managed to save some of the stuff. There was the keyer program. There was the packet program for like a packet radio terminal. Do you have anything remember about that?
Well, packet radio was really big back then. It was a data method used on VHF bands. I think it's like 1200 bauds, and it was like kind of like a BBS thing or something. Never messed with BBS as much, but my sons did, and it was a lot of fun for
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
Before
it's
everything
pretty
got wild.
similar. Yeah,
But
BBS, but way slower.
yeah, it was really slow, and but everybody was doing it, so I was doing it. It's another one of those things, use it for a while. Okay, I did that. It was fun. I wrote some programs for it, but trying to remember if I did any other ham radio stuff. I think I did a digital synthesizer control program. I did that both on the Atari and on the IBM PC. I transferred over to programming and assembly on the PC, which is basically you're doing 8088 or 8086, whatever, doesn't matter. My computer was a 286, but the assembly language, if you're not going into protected modes, all of us is all the same. So I did it on both. But the Keyer thing may have been my last really big Atari program. And then I, went over to the SIO2 PC, which meant I was programming mainly on the PC as a utility for the Atari, although I wrote some Atari programs that would interact with SIO2 PC. So I was going back and forth. But, and after Windows kept evolving, eventually SIO2 PC really you couldn't make it run anymore. First you'd completely exit Windows and go to DOS, and then they had a DOS box, and that would sort of work. Then after a while, it ain't gonna work at all. I've even got some like C programs I wrote for utilities to work with SIO2 PC to take Atari images. And they're not, you open that, they don't call it a DOS box anymore. It's a terminal or a console or something. You try to run it and it says, we can't run. And then you look at your source code and I go, I've got some C language, and I go, now I'm going to exit to assembler. That's not going to work on a modern day computer. But so, I kind of had to get out of the business for a while. And then PICs came around, especially the ones that have double EEPROM, not EEPROM. So, man, you can just, it's like just interacting with your disk drive. You do it, you burn it to the PIC. It's got a bug in it. Do the edit, just like I was saying about my initial use of the Atari with having the screen. It's the same thing. And then I went to some of the Atmel chips, what they call them, AVRs, and then AVR led me to Arduinos, which I said I never wanted to learn C, but then I finally realized if I'm going to write as many programs as I want to in my lifetime, I'm going to have to get away from the language, especially on the PIC. It had that RISC language, where you have a reduced instruction set. So it's so hard to do certain things. I'd be programming that and I think, man, I long for a 6502. That thing was so great. It's funny that you've taken a step backward, but yeah, you had. But yeah, I went over to C and had a lot of fun with that. I'm still doing that, writing programs for the Arduino, and it's kind of bottom level stuff. Oh my God, I said a while ago I was in an elite priesthood when I was programming assembler 6502. Well, now I'm doing everyman stuff, but no need to get the ego involved. It's fun, and you can write some good programs, and it's cheap. I like that too.
Right. On the Atari disk you sent me, there was also a game, a tank game. Did you write that, or?
I was wondering if that was on there because I was hoping we could bring it up.
Yeah.
That my brother wrote that, and we were programming assembly language on the Atari at the same time, and we didn't live in the same city, so we'd exchange, we'd mail letters and stuff, and on our progress. And it's interesting. I'm more into the logic and data stuff, but I'm terrible about the visual stuff. So you won't see me programming. I never did any player missile graphics. I did but he is more into the visually oriented stuff. So he's doing a game. He's doing the player missile graphics, and it was so cool working with him and discovering things. And we had a famous a famous saying, and everybody that programs probably goes, I'm going to do this and this and this, and then the punchline is should be simple.
Right. Yeah.
And that means it's going to take you like 2 weeks to debug, and you think it's going to take an hour. But yeah, so that's fine. He got away from that hobby and got into other things, and I tend to stay with one thing and beat it to death. So I'm still doing the programming thing.
So did
Plus,
you and your brother work on the tank game together? Was it a collaboration?
not really. I think he might have told me a few things, or maybe I made a couple of suggestions. I was telling him about interrupts and how the interrupt works, and he sent me a letter. I think it was company mail. We're in the same company in different cities at the time, so it could go back and forth pretty fast. But he says, what you're saying is I could do this and this and this, and then I could ground this pin, and then the color of the screen would change. And then he updates it later, says, holy shit, this really worked. He says, that synthesized speech thing pales next to this. He was working on one of those speech synthesizer things for the Atari. And but that was a lot of fun playing with, learn about and you get into such crazy things with the bugs that happen. If you're in a player missile screen, there's a defined outline and it's smaller than your TV screen. So his tanks, I don't know if I gave him the idea, but I said, when they went away from 2-player games to all 1-player, that was bad. I like the old 2-player games like Pong and Tank and so forth. But anyway, so he's doing this tank game, and he's got little tank icons driving around, player missile. And there was something about not wanting to get outside the main screen. And so if he bumped into the edge of the screen, his program would back him up a couple of pixels. Well, what he found was he got over to the edge of the screen, he rotated his tank around, and the corner of it hit the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And so going forward meant going backwards, and it dragged him outside the screen. So he's in another universe. He couldn't get back in. He's crawling around outside. It was so funny to hear him tell that. And his cure was crazy. He made the back end of the tank rounded so it wouldn't, so it still worked the same way. He just didn't have a corner to accidentally hit the screen border when he was turning it around. So that's
Nice.
some of the nutty stuff you get into.
What's your brother's name?
Pat Kennedy.
Pat Kennedy.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to put I'll make sure your software and Pat's tank game get into the Atari databases, and just want to make sure he's credited right.
Yeah. If you played that game and you cause the other guy's tank to explode or something explodes, the explosion, it happens so quick you can't really see it, but it says PLK, Patrick Lewis Kennedy.
Oh, sneaky.
But yeah, talking about communicating with him with letters, this SO2PC thing, and of course before that, and somewhat concurrent with it, the keyer thing. It's hard to imagine now, and I'm sure you've had the same thought, that now we communicate like we're doing, or we send each other a text, email, or something. Back then, people, I'd get a letter in the mail. Mr. Kennedy, I heard about your SO2PC thing. Sounds great. Here's however many dollars, bill me one or send me a disc or something. So I box it up and send it to him, and then I get another letter, says, oh, it's beautiful, I love it, or there's a bug here, or it doesn't work with my system, can you fix this, And some of these people would write, like 2,000 words, it's single space type letters. And, nobody writes letters anymore, including myself, although I do ramble on and email quite a bit, but it's, I got this huge stack. I started going through it this morning. I got through about half of it. I wanted to see if anything was interesting in there. Partly I'm trying to recreate some of the date frames of some of the stuff, because when that many years go by, these days I keep kind of like journals, so I can look up when did this happen. But when I get back into the 80s, I don't have it. So and you write these letters, and people write you letters, and they got all this header stuff, but they don't put a date.
Right.
But sometimes they do,
Sometimes you get a postmark or something that helps you. Love it.
It used to have, I think, so much more in terms of comments, but I think it finally got so big it kind of blew up the macro edit thing. I go, I'm gonna have to strip out all these verbose comments. And now I wish they were still there so I could remember how some of this stuff worked. I had a whole folder of stuff, flow charts and explanations of how things work. There's some interesting stuff in there, at least I thought. the generation of the dots, dashes, and spaces was done by timer interrupts. And I feel like this is probably maybe poor practice, but I thought it was a good thing to do. During an interrupt service routine, the code would look at what's coming next. Well, if it's a key down thing, the next thing's always usually going to be a space. So it would point the ISR to the routine for the space. So I have an interrupt going, but every time it returns, the next time the interrupt occurs, it's going to go somewhere else. It sounds like a recipe for disaster, but if you're careful, it'll work. And it did work. So I forget what else, what all reasons I had for doing that, but I wanted, but it would have to look ahead, because I had a part of the mainline code was taking a character. All right, the guy wants to send a C. Okay, what's a C? That. It's taking that apart. Send a dash, send an inner character space, send a dot, and send another space, send another dash, etc. So within the interrupt, it'd say, where am I? Am I done yet? And when it was finally done, then it was tell them interrupt code to turn the interrupt off if there's not a character in another character in the key. So it got complicated, but it worked really well. So I was really pleased with the approach I took to that. I want to mention one. There was a ham radio Atari. I don't know if it's quarterly. I think it's every other month, called Ad Astra.
Yeah.
And I haven't been able to find that online, so you've got some homework to do.
Oh, I'll send you the links. I've got it. We've got several issues. Yeah. Oh, this is frustrating. I wanted to interview the guy who published it, and I talked to him on the phone, and I was just like, I want to talk to you about this ham radio Atari newsletter. He's like, I'm busy. Call me back next month. I called him back next month. He was dead.
Yeah. I tried to look him up also. I had his call sign, and I saw what hams call silent key. So that was sad. Yeah. I think his name was Jack.
I don't remember right now, but maybe. Yeah. Anyway, we have several issues preserved. I'll send you the links right now.
Great.
So, what else haven't I asked you that I should have about Atari times?
I don't know. There's some reflections on the Atari itself, because I think I may have told you I went in the storeroom and pulled one out of storage for the first time in 20, 25 years, or 30 even. And it's amazing. Of course, this is the original 800, how solidly built that thing was. I said it cost a lot of money. Well, maybe there's a reason. That those keys are solid and clicky. And then there's this die cast structure in there, and the whole thing is heavy. Now, later, when they went to the XLs and XEs, they got smaller and plasticky like the Commodores, even though in terms of performance, they got better, I'm sure, because the operating system was getting better and all that stuff. But anyway, I was kind of amazed at, how solidly the thing was built.
If you could send a message to the people who are still playing with their Ataris today, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if they're still doing it, they're probably having fun. So I just say, keep on with it. I'm still working my way back in. I had to buy I'm going, what have I got that can accept, what is it, NTSC signal, or even red, green, blue, or whatever. I don't even know all those terminologies for video. And I finally had to buy an eBay converter to take those signals. I think they call it luminance and chrominance or something, to turn into VGA, and then buy me another VGA monitor. Fortunately, it had audio. It had speakers in it too. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff you have to do. And then I get on some of the online stuff and ask people, how do you do this these days? And there's a little gadget. I already had one that plugs into the USB port, and then it gives you TTL outputs. And then someone had written a program to do something very similar to SiO2 PC. So I'm booting my real computer off of that. Anyway, I'm rambling off I think you're tie it all up question. Instead, I'm rambling off to other places. But yeah, if you're doing it, I think it's great. I think programming it is great. And of course, playing those old games is really super. So, and I see on the internet that people are doing really good things with them. So I really salute them for that, because I did get away and become an apostate. But I make it a little bit. It's one of those things. I'll get in for a while and I'll say, okay, I've done it.
Well, if you dragged it out of the storage, it sounds like you might be back to the fray. So welcome
Yeah.
back.
Oh, thank you.
Go to the Atari Age forums, get yourself a FujiNet, and you'll be set for the next
Right. Yeah.
10 years. So, yeah.
Right.
I think I have what I need, Nick. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks for taking the time.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, please consider supporting my Patreon at patreon.com/savitz. I've been publishing interviews like these since 2013 and would like to continue doing so for a long time, and your financial support will help. Thanks.